Good evening. You're listening live to the Extreme Classics Show. I'm Rob, your host. My guest with me this evening is the real Dr. V. Good evening, sir. How are you?
Doing peachy.
Peachy. Boy, if you haven't seen Parasite yet, peaches have a or something something to do with that movie, but that's for the other podcast. Tonight's Extreme Classic Review. We do the occasional classic movie for lots of reasons here on the Extreme Movie Show. But tonight's movie is one of my personal favorite actors, starring in one of his greater performances. It's Humphrey Bogart in Treasure of the Sierra Madre from 1948, a John Huston film whose father plays a leading character in here. So, for those of you that don't know, I'm Rob. I'm co-host of the Extreme Movie Show with Eglinton from I Love Comics. We have a lot of different reviews and types and such over on YouTube. I do have a lot of different side shows with the real Dr. V and some others, like action movies, karate stuff, Charlton Heston sci-fi stuff, horror a lot, especially the Hammer films and more recent ones. So check that stuff out. But Extreme Classics is a totally different show in that the real Dr. V, who's the millennial and gives us the millennial perspective, and I'm your 80s kid growing up giving you my perspective. And so we like to just talk about some things that we like and don't like about some of these classic films, and just kind of off the cuff see what kind of comes up with it. Because for me, Doctor, like I said before, there's something about Humphrey Bogart that I was a kid I always liked. And I think we talked earlier before on an 80s movie review stream that back in the
hmm
day, you kind of only knew what was coming out. Cable was still a new thing, a little bit with HBO and other channels, but you got the TV guide. And in the TV guide, you had your three major channels plus your two or three maybe local ones. If you were lucky, you could get in. And we had the one color set eventually, and that was it. It was a wooden console one. And we'd actually, go in there and say, "Oh, we're going to watch this on Saturday or Sunday night." Now, I know that sounds old to you, and it is because there's a age difference between us. But for some reason, as a kid, my father, when we would sit down and he'd always watch movies with us, he'd put on some of these older movies and he would talk about this guy or that guy. And one of the first older people I always remember and feel thankful for watching with my dad was Humphrey Bogart. So as a kid, I tried to see everything I can. And there's one thing about Humphrey Bogart I will say, whether you like this movie or not, guy's got screen presence, he's got charisma, he's the man. What do you think just about him in general?
In general, yeah. See, a lot of them back then were when they did acting, you could tell that they actually were like man's man. Just the way everything was back then. These guys were inhaling the smoke. Uh, of course, they're not like today where like, oh, I got to do a cigarette, I'll take a puff, but I'll quickly blow it out. No, these guys were inhaling it.
Full drags.
Uh, yes, full drags off these things, and they're like, dude, I get paid the to sit here and smoke and do some lines and drink stuff. Like, yeah, of course, sweet.
Yeah, I had
uh,
a family member of World War II, and unfortunately, I knew several people from that generation that died primarily because of lung cancer from smoking. It's like filters, we don't need no stinking filters, which is something, we'll talk about with the badge scene in here
well,
later on. Yeah,
well,
but
now I
overall,
know.
what did
Now
you think of the movie?
it was long, a little longer than it should have been.
You think
It should
so?
have got. It took a while to get to the point. Um, but once these guys actually started mining for gold and stuff, that's when they started picking up, getting a little faster pace. But in the beginning, it was just like, yes, we know that Humphrey Bogart is playing a bum. It's like, goes with the same guy and and asks him, "Hey, can you? I'm an American. Can you spare a fellow American some money?" And it's like he's like the guy's like, "Dude, I gave you money before. I gave you time. Here's some more money." It's like he's like, "Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't look at your face." It's
Yeah,
and
go ahead.
what's I was gonna say what's interesting with that guy in the white suit he's taking the money from. That's John Huston,
Yes,
the
yes.
director.
Very interesting character, and I'll say this: typically we don't really get into what our personal views are with politics, but if some things pertinent, to the movie, or we debate or debating a particular side about something, we'll bring it up. I will say this kind of in general, and people may disagree. I would suggest that this film, being shot like 47 or 48, whenever it came out in 48, it was one of the first films that actually was filmed on location in Tampico, Mexico, and some, of course, backlot sets. But it wasn't the biggest hit necessarily when it came out. It made money, but it's been a cult classic and it's a fantastic performance. But the way current trends, no matter which side of the fence you lead on, and of course the two major sides everyone always thinks about are Democrats and Republicans. Growing up in the South, a Democrat meant something back in the days that it kind of doesn't mean now. And of course, you could divvy up people by what they feel as far as their politics in terms of positions on certain things, whether it's abortion or whether it's military, whether it's a government intervention. So it's interesting because the whole opening to this point, I think you're right in that I'm not going to say it's too long, but it does feel different where we don't know why these two guys are here. We just know they're not in the country. We don't know if they're maybe had fought their leftovers from World War I or maybe a Mexican war or something along those lines. We don't know if they were soldiers of fortune because they certainly do not come across as being unintelligent. And I would suggest that educationally speaking, people who graduated high school or even grammar school way back in the day probably were a bit more educated than kids are today. It's just kids are today are, shoved through and everything. So it was interesting to me just how smart they seem to be, but here you are pointing out the fact that they're trying to bum money off of everybody. So for this first part that you said was a little bit slow, kind of take me through as a millennial your perspective on what you thought of this old movie, what they were trying to say.
Well, it's at the very beginning. They're setting up the scene. They're showing like, hey, obviously these guys, they're down out of luck, and they're not the only Americans that are down there too. So there's been other Americans down in Mexico, and yeah, they're looking for work. I don't know, maybe just and you could tell that the what's his name character is the dumber of the two. Well,
Bob, you
Humphrey
mean?
Humphrey Bogart. Yes, yes.
Okay, Dobbs. You're saying
He
Dobbs seems the simpler of the two?
yes,
Hmm.
he seems a little more simpler of the two. Like obviously they're broke and stuff as they're all mopey and stuff. They haven't had a shave. Like uh, you see how the first coin he gets, he takes and he gets he went and got a drink. So then that kid, they get this little kid that comes up to him while he's sitting there at the bar, and like he's like, go away, he's like, sir, no, sir, you got to buy, it's a good deal, you can win the races, and it's like, he's like, go away, he's like, if you keep bothering, I'm gonna splash the water in your face, and the kid's like, okay, so the kid continues, so he's like, I don't care, splash the water in his face. I was like, man, that kid's like persistent, so it's like, man,
He was.
I would have smacked him.
He's hustling though. He's making that living,
I,
and you got to watch it in
and
a small town. Everybody knows your business.
exactly. So that's the first time I saw him. Like, man, it's like this kid is like the classic trope is like, hey, it's American, you got money, pay me. It's, uh, yeah. Dobbs he seemed like a borderline alcoholic in this,
That's
especially the very
Bogart in
beginning.
any movie.
I
That used to be what
know,
they
I
used to
know.
make fun of in the old comics the Saturday morning comics that we used to watch. They'd always have him holding a drink up and looking like he was just sloshed out of his mind.
Yeah. So yeah, you see him by himself, and then he goes like he spends his money or he drinks whatever he has left. He goes and he's like, okay, well, I have no money and stuff. So he goes to sit down on the bench. That's where he runs into Curtin. Uh, Curtin is the other guy, the American there, and they kind of like, well, they're both in there, and they kind of like done their luck. He's like, hey, I know it's I somewhere we can get some money. We can just go sleep, somewhere for like 50 cents a bed or 50 cents a night, you know. So, so in order to sleep there though, he's like runs into the guy again. He's like he sees the guy at the white coat. He's like, hey, I'm American. Can you spare something? Here Dobbs doing it again. And yeah, the guy's getting irritated. Like, it's the third time this guy has come up to him and like asking for money. And he's like, you know what? It's like, instead of like, cutting you off, because he gave him twice as much. So he actually gave him. He was so mad that he gave Dobbs twice as much gold or pesos that he was going to give him. So that's when and it's so it picked up a little bit. Before they went to go spend the night by at the hotel thing or whatever, they went to a bar, the drink because they came across this guy. This guy's like, well, how are you guys, And it turns out the guy was
Pat.
using them. Yeah,
Yeah, the
they're
contractor.
yeah the contractor. Uh, he was gonna have him do work, but he didn't have money he didn't have enough money to pay for them. He basically, which that kind of confused me at first too. When I was watching, I was like, what did they even agree to do? Because they follow him and they go to wherever else is there, and they're like, well, it's too hot to wait here. So they're like, he's like, well, he sends us to the bar. Or go to the bar, or have some drinks, and I'll meet you there. And then he never showed up.
Well, let me talk about that for a little second, and I'll use it to illustrate one point I was going to bring up because you're right that the first part of this film does seem a little slow. It's very deliberate. Of course, it's setting up the economics of the situation that forces these two guys to get together to meet up with another individual we'll talk about here in a moment, so they can go seek their fortune. And we know it's treasures of the Sierra Madre, so we know they're going seeking for gold. So people will argue about economics differently. United States didn't even really, the way economics ran in the United States was basically you had your gold standard, which, FDR basically confiscated all private gold at one point, and then, of course, Nixon put the final blow on it. Now it's all, fiat paper currency, where it's not really regulated by gold, despite what people say. So there's a whole thing to why gold was important, and there's a lot of comments made about the value of gold in here later, and also some philosophical arguments. But I think early on, what I think is lost today in a lot of generations is that you know we if we think of these two guys as bums, they seemed educated, so maybe they were educated bums. We don't really know their background, so maybe we're jumping to conclusions here. But when you mentioned the kid, who by the way is was Robert Blake as a child, he was ended up being Beretta, I think, in that cop show. So that's for some of our other extreme TV listeners. But in here, I thought of the kid as not being a bum. I thought of the kid as hustling. And what I meant by that is that, hey, he's trying to sell you something, which of course ended up being a lottery ticket for them, where he got lucky and won the money so they could buy their stuff and fund it and move on. Um, but the other bigger picture here is that, it's like the old expression about escorts. You don't pay them for their companionship or their time, you pay them to leave. And so, when, Houston's character, the guy, the rich American who they don't show his face, and he says, "Oh, I didn't see your face, mister. I was only looking at your hands." You know, I think this whole setup here, some might argue that this movie is an anti-capitalist movie where instead of going out working hard where your money can go a long way, it's, two classes. You got the rich elite class who's that's going to stiff you like the foreman Pat. And basically he was saying, "Hey, are you guys laborers? Because I can get you some work, but it's going to be really really hard." And of course, he said, "Hey, I'm paying you fair wages plus a bonus." Obviously, it seemed like it was dumb or stupid, especially by today's standards, to say, "Okay, we'll do that for you here in the middle of nowhere, making this rig." Um, but they went along with it. And the thing that I think is lost is one, the fact that a lot of people would do a lot of things by, a handshake promise, backdoor dealings. And if you stiff somebody, you got what was coming to you. So I didn't look at, Dobbs and Bob, or, Bob Curtin as two guys that were dumb. I think they were obviously trying to survive. And so, yeah, they were trying to hit up the Americans for money, not necessarily. So I'm going to give them a little bit of rope here and go, okay, they're not complete bums because I don't know their situation and how they got there, which is frustrating. But it makes me wonder if that, Houston was trying to show this as a way of going, see, rich people can do whatever they want, act all elitist, and it doesn't matter about the poor people, and they don't care, and everything else. And they make this guy, Pat, to be the bad guy. And it's true, he is in the sense that he stiffs them. So they just say, hey, we're going to be all moralistic. We just want what's ours and what's coming to you. And we have the big bar fight and everything. And then they just take what's him. But of course, you run into some trouble. So I don't know if I like this opening setup to it. I mean, to me, the movie begins when they meet, the old man,
Yeah,
as it were. You know what I'm saying?
that's that's one of the reasons why I felt it so slow because I don't realize I don't think that was necessary. The whole bar fight scene, all that stuff. I would have rather him just take the pesos and then Matt go straight to meet the old guy at the hotel.
Yeah, okay, so I mean, basically, I say it's a setup for them to get the money, but let's talk about it when they meet the old man, which is, John Huston's actual father that he put in here. You said you really liked him as a character, so talk about when they met and as the setup for when we leave.
When they run into this guy, old guy there, he is like he's just so charismatic. this is William Houston or Huston. Uh, everyone in there is like kind of like grouped up and all doggy, and here's him laying on the bench. He's got his hair so slicked up. He's got the long scraggly beard and stuff like this. And he reminded me. I forgot. There's a modern actor out there right now, and he that reminds me of him. I can't remember what his name is. One of the movies like I'll say it again, but this guy, like I said he was out acting Bogart a little bit.
He's
uh,
definitely a scene shark, whatever. Howard, the character, especially when you hear him
yeah,
talking and they're in their flop house walking up, and he's just rambling off to some guys. You don't even see him; you just hear his voice, and he's like, "I know what gold does to a man's soul," and you're like, "Okay, I
yeah,
guess I
yeah,
know I'm gonna have to
yeah.
pay attention to that."
Yes, very key. Like, the whole thing he says, like, I know what gold does to his man's soul. At first, you'll think, okay, $5,000, that's enough. But then you're like, well, I sell for five, I can get 10. Well, for 10, I can get more. And then he's like, well, I talk to you if you want to go mining, you want to mine by yourself because, well, it's you don't have to worry about anybody trying to stiff you. Partners will try to kill you. It's always murder pops up. It's always it. There's always somebody gets upset. People get paranoid. Yeah. So it's like, but he says like you said, it's always best to go by yourself. But some people can't stomach go by themselves. So, but so the whole entire speech, I'm like, as soon as I heard him start talking about the gold, I'm like, oh, I wonder if it's gonna come into play. Because your first thing is I hear, especially on Dow's mouth, Hump Booger's like, not me. No, I would never do that. Gold never change a man. And then
You're like, "Sure."
it's, I'm thinking you've already proved that like you're doing anything for money, pretty much. You're just go get another drink.
Well, and
Though,
that's the thing too, because you're pointing out a couple things that come up where with Dobbs, he actually, if I recall correctly, because he gets a winning ticket from the kid, it's just of course convenient writing. But that being said, allows him to buy the basic supplies, and they agree with
yeah,
Howard to go find their fortune. Hey, and honestly, what better thing can you do other than sit there and say, hey, I bet on myself to go seek my fortune. I don't need to rely on anybody else. I have my group. Let's go ahead and do it. And there's a few sentences that Dom slips in, that make you think, okay, to your point, he's probably the weaker of the two. He's probably the emotional head, where the more intellectually, morally sound person would be Bob. And of course, it makes it seem like, the old man Howard is really just, the unconscious between the two, basically saying, hey, here's the things that we need to pay attention to. So it's a good dynamic, the three of them, because they basically say, well, hey, if you know so much about it and you're alive, how come you aren't rich? He's just like, and he just kind of shrugs his shoulders. But when they agree to, go ahead and get their stuff, the one part I do like is there's some seeds being planted about paranoia, especially when Dobbs basically says, "Hey, it's like 250 you, 250 me, 250 for the old man, or whatever the numbers were." He basically said, "Hey, I'll stake you for the little extra amount or whatever. But we're all doing the same thing. It's not a big deal." But here, what I think is another main problem, and by problem I mean is if you look at this as an anti-capitalist, anti-individual type movie, they all agree to go do something together as a group and to split things up evenly. I understand it, I get it, but it's one of the golden rules in businesses is never start a business. If you start a business, don't have a partner, don't have two partners, don't have family, because something eventually is going to go wrong, and business and family, those things or whatever, you have to have somebody in charge, and they don't. So this is when I sit there and say people want to talk about it being an anti-capitalist film. There was some stuff going on in Hollywood with communists and you know Ronald Reagan and everything else politically speaking, which is not the point of this stream here. So basically point out how it may affect the movie. And the big thing is that they're doing it as a group because that's the only way they feel they can be successful. But they also don't have an exit strategy, which is critical in the business. Now, I'm simply saying this on the back end as an adult, but that being said, if this movie is not about gold, it's about character and how it some doing something like this exposes it. It's like we say in sports with coaching. If I'm ever coaching in my groups, it's sports doesn't build character, it reveals it, and all those cliche things. It's absolutely true. And so here, They get their ponies, they get their supplies, they know where they're going to go. Howard's basically, the guiding light, and even when they're starting to take off, Howard's better than these two guys because he's efficient and he's got the knowledge, but he doesn't tire out as easily as these guys do. He's got all the knowledge, and they come across some fool's gold early on that Howard basically demonstrates his ability and his value to the group. So we're yet to see these two guys that we're questioning their ability. We know they can work hard,
Oh,
but they're still bums. What's going to happen?
uh, the fool's gold made me think they're like even more idiots. You're wasting the water. You're in the
True.
desert.
That's true. And of course, that was another thing too, where I don't know if I remember if it's Howard, but he's basically saying, "Yeah, in these parts, water's more precious than gold." And it's like, oh, something going to happen about water? Maybe that's two things that are going to come up in the future. I don't know. We'll see. So this gets to the point of the movie that you like the most, when they actually kind of make camp and get gold. So talk to me
when
about
they
that a
st-
little bit.
when they actually started building up the sluice box and all that stuff, I'm like, I feel like I'm watching Gold Rush. Like old school Gold Rush, They don't have Big Red, obviously, but I'm like, man, three guys, old school mining equipment, digging a hole into the mountain hill. I don't. It looked easier than against Hollywood, so I mean, I don't know how hard it would be if it'd be realistic in real life if they were able to dig a little mine shaft like they did into the mountain. But
Especially since they weren't
I was
using explosives or anything, it was all manual work.
yes, the water they must be going down to the stream and filling up the buckets, but it take you forever to just get the big giant barrel built. It's like because that's one thing he says. Like they bought all as a supply, so yeah, I figured all the supplies I had was a donkey. So and then they had this giant whiskey barrel. I'm like, where did that come from? Like it's like did they go into town, come back with a whiskey barrel, drag it on the donkeys, or I mean, it's
Well, they had the small town that they would go down to and periodically get supplies, which gets mentioned too,
yeah
because that becomes a plot point here shortly. But the whole thing here is that, and again, this is where I think they show the movie in a positive light, as far as being, pro-capitalist or pro-individual, two different things, of course, but that, hey, through hard work, through hard labor, you might have the opportunity to be successful because, to your point, they're digging a small thing. The mine collapses on them, but Hobbs gets saved or from it. So you're like, okay, they're working together, but it's friggin' hot. I'm here in Central Florida on the grounds of the Pinos Palace, and I'm telling you, today was the first day below 70 degrees since I think one day around Thanksgiving. I mean, and there it's like 110, 120, and it's the dry heat. It's up high, and the dry heat will sneak up on you more than the humid heat down here in our swamps. And you, of course, being Wisconsin's finest, you might get a 90 or 100-degree day and think that that's hot. But can you imagine hard labor where you're trying to work 8, 12, 14-hour days, or maybe even more, as much as possible until you have no sunlight, and fight off the elements, the bandits, which of course are going to show up here again later. Um, I like the fact that they put their blood, sweat, and tears, as we would say, cliche wise, into this, and that they did find gold, because obviously this wouldn't be a movie if they didn't actually get some gold.
right. Uh, yeah, like I said, I enjoyed uh certain parts of this movie. It wasn't a bad movie. It wasn't horrible. I had to turn it off. It's not one of those movies. Uh, it's just that Bogart. I mean, he was great at doing what he's supposed to be. He was supposed to be a guy. He was selfish. He was coming greedy, paranoid. I'm thinking somebody's gonna die here soon. Uh, and for what really blew my mind was like, okay, I know you're black and white, you're using the pop guns. It's like this is the old gangsters in the 20s and 30s where they shoot you and then they no splat. You imagine? So that really is like, come on, you can at least could have used like things, because I'm like, this is basically like you would see in your you made me watch Police Squad. It's like whenever they fired the guns and you see smoke coming out, that's what I thought of right away.
Ian and I on an earlier stream had talked about Tom Cruise's performance in Collateral with hey homie, you forgot my briefcase or whatever it is or something, where he wants his briefcase back from some thugs, and then he has a shootout, and tactically it's just a fantastic scene, but not just because of the tactics of how he handles it. And Tom Cruise obviously knows how to shoot guns in real life. That's one thing I appreciate about him, his willingness to learn things. But also Michael Mann, who I'm really fond of Miami Vice. That was one of my favorite cop shows growing up. Did a really good job of making sure that the guns seem realistic. They're very loud. They've got this massive thump to them. I don't know how in the old days guns were thought of in terms of being put on film, because westerns were really the big thing and all the rage. And honestly, I had great, you know, grandparents and family members that grew up on farms, and so having guns was not necessarily a problem or an issue. But 100 years ago, more than half of people were living in the United States on farms or really close to one, and they would go into the big city, whereas now it's a little bit different. So there may be some things that I think when you watch this film that you might go, I'm not quite sure what they're getting at, or their attitude towards it. But I wouldn't call this film particularly dated, although some people might go, "Oh, it's black and white. There's no way we could watch it." I think it's a beautiful looking film, and again, one of the first films being shot there. But to your point, when they find some gold, and you thought somebody was going to die, you get the feeling this isn't going to be a movie with a happy ending. And I think it's a movie with an appropriate ending. And again, Gold just exposes what everybody really is. So they get to the point where they actually start finding some gold. They're measuring it out. They're doing quick calculations. Howard, of course, the man with the knowledge and experience, his contribution to the group's explaining stuff. And he talks to everybody like, what are you going to do with it? Because that's the whole point. Money's just a tool to get what you want. And so the path to accumulating it is what I think a lot of people argue about. And then, of course, you get into the issue of fairness and equality and all this crap nonsense that people want to talk about. But the bottom line is what are you going to do when you earn it? And so here they're splitting their money up, but the paranoia starts sneaking in. You get Dobbs basically, starting to really look at everybody shifty, and Bogart does this gradually, which I think's really effective in here. He doesn't go full crazy in here. And also, too, I gotta say this, Doctor, even though you're Wisconsin's finest and everything, I'm sure there's a lot of great actors coming from that part of the country. Bogart at this time was like the man in Hollywood, and he is not the most good-looking, pretty type person. Like say,
You know,
Bob is, Curtin is, or Cody that we'll talk about here in a moment, the fourth guy that shows up unannounced or invites himself in. Actually, it's to see him as big as he is end up being the bad guy or the negative side of the coin. And then you see, Bob, who seems kind of like a nice guy, who ends up being, I think, a bit more assertive with his morals as the paranoia increases. I think it's really good. And this is when the movie really takes off here. Really, the second half of the movie is the movie to me. So
uh,
go ahead.
Curtin, yeah, especially when when they because we really didn't help the fact that the old man's like he's like, well, he's like, well, I'm not gonna, I don't, he's like, the whole thing about trusting each other. He's like, I think I'm a trustworthy guy only because if I were to steal from you, I wouldn't get too far with my old legs. It's like, you might want to go hide your gold from your other, if it makes me feel any better, you know? So, because, like, are you going to have me watch? Because he said because he didn't feel good watching over their gold.
Yeah, and they split the stuff up, and they're getting to the point where they've got a sizable enough amount each
Oh,
where all
man.
they
Yeah.
could do is stop and go do their own thing. But the point is again, and it's one of the first foreshadowing things that Howard mentioned earlier was that, you know, you want 10,000, you want 5,000, and then you just want anything. And where do you stop? And here's where they kind of don't really know. And so this kind of gets magnified because they're kind of stewing on all this when they split up the gold. And, there's a scene in here where, Dobbs had hid his money. We don't know where, but there's a Gila monster that kind of crawls underneath a rock. And aside from some stuff that you might go, oh, this is kind of stupid, where he shoots the Gila monster instead of beating it with a stick, the bandits that were on a train that they had helped, save people off the train from earlier may have heard it. We don't really know. So, kind of convenient writing. These bandits show up again here a little bit later. But for me, I'm looking at this going, again, here it comes. They don't have an exit strategy. You're seeing everybody get magnified. How is this going to play out? And I really didn't know, because to me, I thought the movie was basically about Bob and Bob Curtin and Dobbs. But as rewatching it again recently with Howard the older guy, what I liked about Howard's performance was, when somebody would say something, instead of Howard arguing with somebody, basically saying you're wrong, my life experience would suggest this, I'm wiser than you. It wasn't an alpha kind of fight or whatever like that about who's right, which is what guys have a tendency to get into. He just kind of shrugged his shoulders, well, I guess you're right. So it wasn't like he was kowtowing or bending over or being a simp. He was just basically, I think, defusing the situation here because Dobbs basically starts getting a little nutty. But we talked about a fourth character coming in, Cody from Texas, the good old American. Let's talk about Cody for a moment. What do you think?
Cody, he's one of those guys like, I wanted to punch him.
Tell me
it's like
why.
it's like because they're already up there. You're like, well, yeah, he knew exactly the guy didn't want to tell me. Like, oh, you're hunting up there. Like, okay, let me go with you. And the guy's like, dude, I want you up here. Go away. And he's like, well, I'm gonna go up there if you want. I'm here to get gold. I'm like, and and if you die, you know, then you die. I wouldn't have made him a fourth partner. Sorry, I would have bumped him off. By the time I got my gold, I'd be gone out of the country.
Well, I think the thing with Cody is, of course, you can do whatever you want in a movie as far as structure goes. I have a tendency to go to a default position of, one act, two act, three acts. I know the first act, most of your characters have been met, everything's kind of set in motion, and the third act is really the resolution, which I think happens here. But Cody is interesting to me because he represents America. Here's a guy that's assertive. I didn't think he was big and loud like some people think, but I've met a lot of old
Mm-hmm.
school people from Texas, and they have a certain Southern mentality. But it's like they say, everything's bigger in Texas, and you know, um, he comes across that way watching because I almost thought like you too, like, oh, this guy's an idiot. He's bugging me. He wants in on stuff. But what I liked about Cody was that he basically was very assertive and he lets them know, hey, the way I look at this, guys, is there's three options. You can kill me, which, whatever, which the other people have to live with it, so that won't work for you guys. You can include me in. And there was like this third option. And it's like, it sounds kind of like procedural, like, people don't talk that way. But this guy was an expert. He mentioned everything, so skill wise about how to find gold. He knew what was going on, so he was wise, just like Howard, but he was younger and he's American. So I don't know if Houston's trying to portray him
Well,
as a brash American trying to show up everybody, the
yeah,
rich guy,
yeah,
especially from Texas. But of course, his character there is just there to serve as a foil because he actually turns out when he dies in a shootout with the bandits, basically having a wife at home, and all he's trying to do is seek his fortune. He's actually not terribly far from home being in Texas, but yeah, if you didn't
yeah,
find fortune, on the farm and you didn't have it in war, you would have to go to places to go seek out work. So I kind
yep,
of went, I didn't mind the character, and it was a little convenient to have him in there, but of course, at the end of the movie, the fact that Bob decides to go see his wife and let him know how he died and everything, seems a little sweet too. But that notwithstanding, I mean, I don't know. It makes me wonder. Like I say, are they really trying to make this like an anti-capitalist, slightly, anti, American individualism type movie or not? Because to me, I want to just focus on the character part of it, but Houston had some issues with, the whole communist thing and how they're supposedly an underground batch of communists in Hollywood. And he eventually ended up moving away from the United States and I think going to Ireland to do other movies and basically soured on, the way relationships were. So, again, not trying to be too political, but I think it's relevant for the case of the movie because I think it's pretty odd here. But keeping it to the character thing as we get to the end there, you get to the point where after the bandits attack them and all that, they're getting ready to leave because they're like, all right, we're just going to stop, and that's fine. And they have like a moment of sanity, I want to say, between them. But then, of course, some people go, well, wait a minute. We've got to break down the mine. We can't just leave it here. The earth's been very good to us. We have to, honor the blessing that she provided for us to do it. And I know some people look at that and go, "Man, are you effing crazy? You know how much work that's going to take and energy, and we only got so much supplies to get back to town and all that." But they're like, F it, let's go ahead and do it. We got our money. And I'm looking at it going, that's kind of stupid when you think about it logistically. Now, I understand philosophically what Howard's trying to say, but yeah, I just, yeah, I don't know.
Howard,
Yeah.
Howard had some good stuff in here. Like he's sitting there making the beans.
Hmm.
And like he's like, "Hey, you fellas, how about some beans? You want some beans? Going through some mighty rough country tomorrow. You better have some beans." I'm like, how many times is he gonna say beans?
Beans
Uh,
are good and they travel well, and
because
there's a
cool, because
nutritional value to weight ratio versus price that you have to take in effect when you're packing supplies, and it seemed like Howard knew all that.
I know it's just said Blazing Saddles is a person coming out of the beans. I'm like, oh,
Who doesn't sit around a
past
campfire
gas.
with beans? I know, right? Let's talk about the
uh,
last part of the movie here, where they kind of all end up getting separated, and Dobbs is going off the rails, and then of course Howard gets called back to the town to work on the young child that apparently drowned.
that was weird the way he was doing. If the kid had drowned and he's trying to like give him the breathe again, you pull the arms up and you push what he's doing with the arms.
Hmm.
I don't know if that's really true that would works. I would assume you would have done like turn him on his side maybe
Well,
and give CPR.
uh, the village being very small and very devout in their beliefs. And I forget what Howard's background was. Obviously, I'm thinking medical, maybe in the military. I do recall at a very young age going through CPR where there was something about pumping the arms and all that too, something about getting full body circulation. And as I've learned it over the years, getting my coaching certifications and redoing all that stuff, I know that the CPR methodology has changed a bit, from compressing and breathing into somebody's mouth versus just now just compressing only because the most important thing is the blood flow to the heart and really to the brain. But I remember looking at that thinking the
Mm.
same thing. Wow, how things have changed over the years. So that may be dated, but at the time that was the way to do it.
In the 1940s, yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, they didn't do your typical where you're pushing on the chest and then you breathe it into their mouth with the air and lungs.
And a lot of babies
But
weren't born at home on farms way back in the day. And of course, at some
oh
point
yeah,
here after the
yeah.
war, everything kind of changed more towards the cities and stuff. But yeah, it was important because I think for Howard, his life of wisdom and his contribution to the group, he had an exit strategy. He knew how it was going to play off. And he talked about, well, maybe, they'll take me or whatever. And you see him there. The kid comes back. Um, he basically stays there and he has to kind of do it to honor them. So he's trying to do and live life by his creed, his motto. And he has one. We're not sure what the other two people's are because they've never really demonstrated it or specifically said it. And I think that's another interesting point to this movie. So Howard's basically sitting there. He's kicking back by the water. He's got the really young senorita bringing him food. He's got the plate. I mean, he's in paradise. He knows he's an old guy and doesn't have much time. He's made it. He's done it. He's had his vision. He's got the money to actualize that from his savings. Um, Plus, he saved a life. So everything's cool with him. It's just that, Dobbs being a little bit kind of manic at this point wants everything for himself, and he gets pissed because they don't have the experience or the knowledge or the wisdom to make it down from the mountain to the town. And this is where things really break up because there's a bunch of back and forth, which kind of drags on between Dobbs and Bob about everything. But eventually, Dobbs does get the upper hand a little bit, and he's full blown crazy. Bob's left to die, kind of gets resurrected, re-meets Howard. But the big scene here to me at the end is
Well,
when,
I think he shot him in the shoulder,
yeah, I think he
and
shot him in the chest too a little bit, like he got him twice or something, maybe in the arm, but he
yeah.
left him to die instead of finishing the job, which again seems kind of stupid, but that's what he did.
But I love it. But he's like, well, the buzzards, if the buzzards there, they'll draw people, and I should go, bury him. Because first he's like, I should take his clothes off and bury him. I was like, what? And let the ants and all that stuff. I'm like, okay. And you can tell this is where Bogart's acting comes into play, where he just starts going crazy, and this is what I like. This is like walking Phoenix crazy, man. It's,
Yeah, yeah,
you literally believe that this guy is nuts. He already looks dirty and mangy and all that stuff. So, so you can see the sweat dripping off of him and all that stuff. And he's just like shifty eyes, and he starts, because early in the movie he was talking to himself
yeah,
when they were
just a
gonna
little
send him.
bit. Yep.
Yeah, they're gonna send him to town. He's like, why they send me to town? Why don't they send it? They're planning to steal my gold. That's what it is. Yeah, they're yeah. And just like when what's his name Tim Hunton's character, Tim Holt's character. His name is Curtin. Curtin came across I accidentally came across his where he had where Dobbs had his money stash under a rock.
Hmm.
He's like, "Oh, no, you're just trying to steal my money under a rock." And I'm like, you grab the gun. He's like, "Okay," like He's like, "Well," and he's like, "Okay." He's like, if you don't believe if you don't you think you're such a man, stick your hand in there because it was a iguana or something like
A
that.
Gila
Basically,
monster.
yeah, you
That's a
die.
thing.
Yeah, yeah. So and when they shot that, I'm like, is this, dude? I swear, I was like, is this a trained lizard where they'll play dead?
No, I imagine it's a real lizard that they shot, or they got one that looked really like it because they filmed a lot of it on location. And some of the rules back then may have been a little different, not necessarily loosey goosey, but hey, you're in another
Yeah,
country, and once Houston bribed the officials to get on set there, he was good as gold. So, yeah, I
yeah,
mean,
yeah. That scene, yeah, you just see little things, a little Dobbs, like, and just see him just slowly going crazy. And it's like, yeah, this is starting to get good.
yeah.
And like, yes, because I'm like, yes, I called it. I knew he was gonna go. He's been the one to go crazy. I'm gold will never affect me. It's like it depends on the man. I'm like, well, apparently you're the man who goes crazy.
Well, the thing is
And
once they decide to kill Cody, from then on, it's A plus. I mean, all the way to the end, it's
yeah, yeah,
fantastic. So it is a good burn. It does start slow a little bit. I'll agree with you on that. In the middle's
yeah,
interesting, like almost like an adventure, which is kind of cool. But yeah, that tonal
yeah.
shift to this third act, towards the end is fantastic.
It just gets dark.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh and then it goes to comedy when you see the old man with the Indians over there. It's like, and then it goes back to being dark again. He's like, well, because the guy he saves them. He's like, the old man Howard patches him up stuff. But yeah,
Yeah, this
it's just
last scene here, though, before we get on our final thoughts, I think is to me, I'm just saying it because it matches what I think is one of the best scenes in the film, and it's he's on his own, Dobbs, and he's about to die, and Bogart, I think, had lost his hair from smoking or from a vitamin deficiency, B12, I think it is, and so they put wigs on
yeah,
him. But I
yeah,
think what they did was
yeah.
they made him darker in his features as he got crazier. So by now, yeah, his hair's all messed up. He looks like Ernie
Well,
Munson
don't
from Kingpin here at the end with his hair messed up, and he finds that really horrible, crappy bit of water, and he takes a sip, and
oh
and you're like, okay, you'll do anything to survive, and the water's probably bad, but maybe you'll live, till you get to town, and then puke your guts out for 3 weeks, and hopefully not die, diarrhea or whatever. But then you get the shadow of the bandito that they
yeah.
had crossed before.
Here comes the
We don't
here
need
comes
badges,
the
guys. All that sort of stuff. And he goes to shoot and doesn't. And apparently they whack him with the machetes. And Bogart's like, yeah, I
oh
wanted
yeah,
them to
I was
really behead me and show it.
jeez.
No, I just really liked it. He got his just desserts. He didn't have a moral code. You couldn't tell what it is. At least the other guy was a little bit moral. He got what he deserved by his, not by because we want him to do it, but because that's what his nature is. So there's definitely, I think, a consistency between all three of these characters and whatever their personal code is. Howard was, the wise old guy. He gets one final shot in life thanks to a bit of humility and experience and luck. Um, and even though they lose all their money here,
And
which is
well, yeah,
ironic, because they
because
never end up with it all. The bandits had stole
well,
all their stuff and took
the
it and thought it was crap and put it in the wind. What were you
yeah,
gonna say?
they didn't know what gold was.
Oh
I'm
God,
like,
how could you not?
uh, you're a bandit. You steal gold. You got a gold watch. How do you not know what gold looks like? I mean,
But it's true. The bandits, to your point, with their moral code, they're bandits. They steal stuff they don't think. That's why they get caught in town and get hung or shot or whatever it is back then. But swift
yeah,
justice or whatever with the branding and everything. So that's why I liked how they showed all those things earlier on because it sets up what's supposed to happen at the end, and it's not forced. It's like, yeah, makes perfect sense. And then, of course, the probably I don't know if he's the most moral one, but he certainly ended up, I think, instead of seeing like a nice guy or a simple guy, he ended up being a bit more assertive. Bob, I'm talking about, he ended up basically, laughing with Howard, at the old man at the end there about their gold getting lost at the
oh,
irony of the situation.
yeah, Curtin.
Yeah, Bob Curtin, and then
He's
he's like, "Well, I'm
he's
gonna
the
go to Texas, I guess," because it's a woman and
I
she's
would,
now a widow. So hey, by the way, your husband's dead. They'll probably hook up and he can grow peaches.
yeah. I mean, it how funny is that? It was almost curtains for curtain.
Oh God. You've been saving that one up, haven't you?
Yes.
Well, I'll give you my
Oh,
final thoughts here, and then I'll ask yours before we wrap it up here. Overall, a lot of times this movie gets talked about as just a fantastic film. I think one of the greatest of all time. I think in part because of Bogart's performance. I think that's true. Yes, it's a long movie. I don't mind. I think movies are obviously best when you can see what happens to human conditions. We've talked about it before. Obviously, the extreme classics we've only done a few of. Um, Really, what it is I try to pick something that I liked from way back in the day or something I thought was significant. And most of the time, it's a movie you haven't seen, maybe you've heard of, and you've expressed a real strong interest in checking some of these things out. So it's kind of cool to hear what you like and don't like about it. But I love this film. I think it's a great film. It's better than anything that's come out recently in the past few years in theaters, in my opinion. Um, I just think it's a must see if anybody hasn't seen it. And I agree with some of the comments on people on our stream. Has Bogart ever done a bad film? Maybe one or two of his early ones when he was, a gangster with a really bad lisp or something. I don't know. I mean, I just think he's fantastic, and he's like Tom Cruise before Tom Cruise. Not necessarily action, but you watch it because of him. And so you get a movie that is shot well, looks great. I don't know if I'd call this a western necessarily, but I just love it. It makes me feel like, wow, what would this have been like at the time to go into the theater and see something like this? Fantastic. Um, if I ever get to see it in my local theater that it comes out when they sometimes do these old movies, I'd much rather see this than probably anything that's coming out more recent. But yeah, it's that good of a film. I think it's fantastic, and I absolutely love it. Whether you think it's anti-capitalist, anti-individual, whatever, it's about character. There's no secrets to it. If you look at it through that lens, fantastic film, does its job beautifully. Music's a little loud, I thought, at the beginning, but maybe that was the print version I've got here on the Super HD channel. So, I don't think you liked it nearly as much as I did, Doctor. So, what are your
well,
final
I,
thoughts?
my final thoughts is that even though it's a slow burn movie, it picks up towards the end. It gets better. And just the old man, like he's you think he's crazy. And because there's a scene where they're like, "Hey, remember?" Is like Curtin's like, "You remember when you said back in Tampico about having to carry that old man on their backs?" Dobbs like, "Yeah, that's before I took him on for an ordinary human, not being part goat." And he's just running up. He's running up the hill.
Yep.
There's some good philosophical things in here. Like they're talking about it's just how we're talking about the gold, how gold changed the man. Uh, and you have Dobbs when he's going crazy. He's like, yeah, what he said about the conscience. If you believe it, if you have a conscience, like it'll eat at you. And he's trying to talk himself out of it. So he's like, conscience, what a thing! If you believe you got a conscience, it'll pester you to death. But if you don't believe you got one, what could it do to you? Makes me sick. All this talking and fussing about nonsense. Uh, just the little lines in here and stuff. Um, it's a pretty deep movie.
Yeah. Yeah.
The
It's
lines, yeah.
fantastic. Yeah.
Uh, so just man, just like the three most opposite character personalities like being thrown together. Dobbs being like the cold, paranoid, heartless one, and then you got Curtin being like the one. He has the morals. He could have let him die, but he went back and he saved him. He thought about it. Anyway, he went. He saved Dobbs from the mic collapse. And he's straight. Being the good boy, good Christian boy. Necessarily believes in God, and didn't say said no, but he just felt he moral obligated to do the right thing. The old man, crazy. He's crazy, but he's like but he's a guy, happy crazy guy. He's like he's like I'm these guys don't even know that the job for the Indians is being like their shaman. He's like, yeah, I got it made three meals a day.
Strength of
Like,
convictions. Yeah, that senorita was bringing up something, and those were all locals too. So I'm sure he's going, hey, at my age, she's good enough. I get
right?
I'm the man here. I get my pick of the litter.
Yeah, yeah,
But
yeah.
it's not
He's the
for nothing. He did. he did a very positive thing for the community, and they wanted to show his
But
appreciation. I don't think there's anything that's not sincere about it.
I just got one question for you, Rob.
What's that?
Say, Mister, will you take a fellow American to a meal?
Well, hey, we did Key Largo a little while back. We've been talking about doing Treasure for a few weeks now with our schedule with the holidays and whatnot, getting back on track here. I'm glad we were able to do it tonight. It's 2 for 2 on Bogart. Love them a lot. We'll see if Bogart's the next one, Extreme Classics, or if it's going to be something else. But I know we've got some science fiction to do and some horror, and I think we're going to get back to Chuck Norris pretty soon, too. So be looking for that, guys. For the doctor, for myself, I'd like to thank everybody for showing up, for listening. I really enjoy doing these classic ones because it's a bit of a different vibe than when we do the horror one or sci-fi or even our top 10 Tuesdays with Anglatine. So thanks everybody for showing up. Stay extreme. Good night, everybody.
And stay safe.
Toodles. TTFN. Au revoir. Auf Wiedersehen. Goodbye.
Don't steal my gold.
Gold, we don't need no stinking gold.